Naomi Stein had just left New York after a failed project, planning to spend a few weeks back home to get herself together. But her hammer struck something cold and metallic when she broke through the garage floor of her late grandfather's workshop to fix a leaking pipe. Beneath the dust lay a sealed steel hatch with no markings, only a faintly engraved symbol, JK-42. They had always said her grandfather was a deserter, but under Naomi's feet was an armored vehicle that had never run, as if it had been waiting for one person. And now it had awakened. If you believe some doors only open when the right person comes along, hit like, share, and follow to join Naomi on a journey through a story time once tried to bury. Naomi Stein never planned to return to the town of WWII. After 3 years trying to build an independent mechanical repair business in Brooklyn, her startup collapsed without a sound, losing a significant contract and a boyfriend in the same week. Naomi stepped off the train with a toolbox, a backpack, and a heart running on empty. Her grandfather's hometown was just as quiet as the last time she'd seen it the day of his funeral. Jakob Klein is a reclusive old mechanic with no children, medals, or eulogy. People in town called him a cruel name. Jakob the Runner, the man who walked away from his unit during World War II, the man who hid from the world and never spoke of what happened. Naomi never believed it, but she'd never had proof to defend him. She only remembered what he once told her. Not everything gets told right, but machines don't lie. Garage he left behind sat behind an old brick house, its red-tiled roof flaking apart. Inside, cobwebs hung thick, the air heavy with the smell of oil and rust. Naomi began cleaning and planning to repair the water pipes and turn them into a temporary workshop. By noon, as she pried up a rotten wooden floorboard near the old sink, she noticed a patch of concrete darker than the rest. She grabbed a crowbar and chipped away. A piece of brick popped loose, clang. Metal, her breath caught. She shone her flashlight closer. A crack outlined a steel plate welded shut with dull seams. No serial numbers, no handles, only one faint engraving nearly erased by time. JK-42, Naomi's pulse quickened. She sank to her knees. The last image of her grandfather flashed in her mind the day she'd left for college. If you ever come back, he'd said, remember secrets hide in the most familiar places. She ran back to the house, rummaging through an old coffee tin he used to stash tiny tools. Inside was a ring of rusted keys and one small black one with a circular dent. She took it back to the garage. The key fit. The hatch clicked open with a low metallic thud. Naomi drew a deep breath. A cold gust rose from below, carrying the scent of old oil, steel, and something else. Something that wasn't meant to stay hidden, but had never been ready to be found. The hatch opened with a dry screech of metal. Naomi aimed her flashlight into the darkness below. The pit was rectangular, nearly 2 meters deep, its walls lined entirely with steel. No dust, no cobwebs, only the smell of aged oil, rubber, and that dense, metallic scent of time pressed too long in silence. As she stepped down the iron ladder, each footstep rang out, clang, echoing through the hollow space. Her beam swept across a large shape under a faded brown-silver tarp. Along its edge were stenciled words, property of J. Klein, Class B. Naomi pulled the tarp away. Beneath it stood a small armored vehicle, painted faded gray-blue, its surface coated in a thin film of dust but untouched by rust. Along its side, the words are still barely visible in chipped paint. Mercy 42, no military insignia, no flag, just a small 6-pointed star near the hinge of the door. Her hands trembled as she reached out. The handle gleamed faintly, uncorroded. She pulled. The door opened smoothly without resistance. Inside the cabin, everything was intact. A wide steering wheel, mechanical gauges, old-style levers and pedals. On the passenger seat lay a leather-bound notebook placed neatly, as if waiting for someone to return. She picked it up. The cover read faintly, JK 1944. Inside, handwriting in thin but steady ink lines. Development notes, Mercy 42 prototype model, never deployed, classified. If you're reading this, then at least the vehicle survived. The next page, sold all tools, workshop, and lathe to complete the chassis. Powertrain adapted from military Jeep Willys, fuel tank sealed, cabin designed for 12 children, first mission never carried out. Naomi sank into the driver's seat. Her hand brushed the gear lever cold. Under the layer of dust on the dashboard, a faint inscription appeared. For the day we couldn't have. She didn't fully understand, but she felt it. This wasn't just a machine. It was a promise left unfinished. She checked the glove compartment. Inside was a hand-drawn map, folded neatly beside an old black and white photograph. Jakob standing beside the original Mercy 42, one arm around a young woman. In the photo's corner, a faint caption read, WWII, April 1944. Naomi gasped. The background, the trees, the brick wall was the same ground she was standing on. Naomi posted a few photos on an international mechanic forum. The strange vehicle, the hand-drawn map, the old journal. She didn't write much. just asked, "Has anyone ever seen a vehicle like this?" Mercy 42, a WW2 unit never officially documented. The post quickly drew comments. Most of them were mocking. "Nice cosplay project, girl. Leave WW2 to the real ones. What's next alien tech in your grandpa's garage?" One user, WW2 vet fan with an American flag avatar, wrote bluntly, "Your grandpa was a deserter. Over here we honor real vets, not cowards who ran and later pretend to be heroes." Naomi stared at the screen, her throat tightening. She knew how deeply Americans valued veteran honor. She did too, but Jakob had never defended himself. He let people say whatever they wanted, and now they were saying it about her. She printed the map and started researching the coordinates. Most had disappeared, cleared forests, new developments, rail lines long gone. Only one location still existed. Greifswald Station, now a modest WW2 memorial site. Naomi went to the town council to apply for a permit to restore the vehicle for public display. A young clerk glanced over the sketches, then raised an eyebrow. "What is this, some deleted scene from Indiana Jones?" Naomi replied flatly, "No, but if my grandfather built it to save lives, I think people deserve to know." The clerk scoffed. "No documentation, no official record, no credibility. You starting your own museum or just trying to go viral on TikTok?" Naomi walked out, her fist clenched around the rejected application. She wanted to go back to New York. She wanted to quit. That night, she returned to Mercy 42. Wind blew through the cracked window of the cabin. She turned on her flashlight, scanning the weld lines, the circular bolt marks like fingerprints. "A weld line tells you who made it," her grandfather used to say. Beneath the dashboard, a faint light caught a shallow engraving in the corner. M. Klein. She'd never heard that name, but it felt familiar, like something buried long ago, brushing her spine now that it was exposed. Naomi sighed, but this time not from exhaustion. This time it was because she knew, if she walked away, no one else would return. And if her grandfather had been forgotten for 80 years, then the least she could do was not going to let the silence continue another day. Naomi hadn't planned to turn on the TV. But that night, alone in the cold house, she fumbled for the remote the way her grandfather used to do. The screen flickered to life, scrolling news headlines, a tense anchor's voice delivering rapid updates. Conflict at the eastern border continues to escalate. An evacuation convoy of children remains trapped in the village of Dolinska after the main bridge was destroyed. Relief teams are unable to reach them. Naomi froze. Dolinska. She bolted to the garage and unfolded Jakob's map. Her finger traced the faded ink, stopping at a circle. D42 final route if all others blocked. Her heart pounded. The coordinates matched. The location matched. Jakob had marked it nearly 80 years ago. She looked at the handwritten note beside the circle. "Only take this path if there's no other way." The next morning, Naomi removed the side panels from Mercy 42 and began checking the systems. Drivetrain salvaged from an original Jeep Willys. The fuel tank is empty but sealed with no rust. Filters need replacement. She worked for 6 hours straight. Sweat soaked her shirt and grease coated her hands. She pumped in diesel by late afternoon, swapped a backup battery, and flipped the ignition. At first, it just sputters. Then a deep, steady rumble. Dashboard lights blinked on. Naomi exhaled like the machine had been holding its breath for 8 decades, and she just helped it breathe again. She called a war relief organization. A tired woman answered on the other end. "Sorry, we don't accept individual proposals, especially for unregistered vehicles. The Dolinska zone is closed." Naomi sent a photo of Mercy 42. Waited 5 minutes. A new message came in from a different number. "This is Dr. Kaja, frontline volunteer. I learned about Mercy 42 from a declassified National Archives file. If you think it can run, I'm coming with you." Naomi stood before the vehicle, the cabin light shining onto the photo of Jakob and Miriam, now taped to the dashboard. She remembered the night her grandfather spoke about hearing the day broadcast on American radio. She remembered him placing his hand on her shoulder at 14, saying, "Some things no one will believe we tried, but they're still worth doing." She gripped the steering wheel. She didn't know if she could save anyone, but she knew if he had drawn that map, built this vehicle, sealed it away for 8 decades, then maybe he never meant to drive it. Maybe he was waiting for someone else to do it for him. Naomi started up Mercy 42 at 5 a.m. The engine roared to life. Each growl echoed through the garage, calling Jakob back from a long sleep. She loaded the rear compartment with water jugs, dry food, and a first aid kit. Dr. Kaja arrived right on time with a small backpack and alert eyes like someone who'd walked through a few war zones. "If this is what I think it is, then this won't be the first time Mercy 42 was meant to save lives, but it might be the first time it actually gets the chance." The forest trail near the border was rough. The headlights cut through thin fog, tires crunching over old roots and sharp stones. As they passed an old junction, Naomi heard a siren in the distance. A local police car was circling back behind them. "We're being followed," Kaja said, unsurprised. Naomi pressed the gas. Mercy 42 wasn't fast, but it was solid. They turned onto a narrow, rocky side path, but wide enough to fit the vehicle. She wasn't driving to run. She was driving because no one else would get to the children waiting ahead if she stopped. Over an hour later, they reached the final civilian checkpoint before the red zone. 3 guards, a wooden barrier. One soldier stepped forward, scowling at the vehicle. "This transport is not on the evac list. No markings, no registration. Please turn around." Naomi opened the door and stepped out. She didn't offer paperwork. She simply pointed to the faded lettering on the side of the vehicle. "Jakob Klein, Mercy 42. My grandfather built it to save people. He never got the chance. Today, I'm doing it for him." The soldier looked at the vehicle, then at Naomi. His eyes stopped at the small 6-pointed star near the door. He said nothing, turned back, lifted the barrier. On the final stretch toward Dolinska, the terrain got slick. Naomi leaned forward, eyes sharp. The radio crackled to life, faint, distorted, but the tune came through. "This land is your land, this land is my land." Kaja placed her hand on the steering wheel as they crossed a shallow stream. "You know, my grandmother was one of the few Jewish children evacuated from Warsaw in 1944. An American soldier drove them out in an unmarked vehicle." Naomi gripped the wheel tighter. "This time, it's my turn." The evacuation point was an old basement beneath a crumbling church. In the flashlight beam, 11 children and 3 volunteers huddled around a pile of worn blankets. Water and food were nearly gone. Kaja entered first. Naomi followed. She said nothing, just opened the back door of Mercy 42 and gave a slight nod. The children stared at the vehicle like it had stepped out of a storybook, not sleek, not modern, but solid, like a promise finally kept. As everyone gathered their things for the return trip, Kaja handed Naomi a small wooden box she'd found under the driver's seat. "It has your name on it, or someone who looks like you." Naomi opened it. Inside was an old black and white photo. Jakob Klein standing next to the original Mercy 42, his hand resting on the shoulder of a young woman, dark hair. Intense nose, a gentle, tilted smile. Miriam Stein, Naomi's grandmother. Even faded, Naomi couldn't mistake that smile. On the back it read, "Jakob and Miriam, April 1944. See you again in a world without fear." Naomi's hands trembled. Childhood memories rushed back. Her grandmother used to tell stories of a wild-haired mechanic, great with watches but always missing his train. She'd never said a name. Naomi returned to the front seat and picked up Jakob's old leather notebook. A slip sealed with wartime adhesive was on the final page between 2 glued layers of paper. Naomi carefully peeled it open. Faint ink revealed, "If the one who opens this is Miriam's grandchild, then the promise was never dead. She was my last light. Mercy 42 was never just to save someone. It was my way of sending a chance forward, to the family I never got to meet." Naomi froze. She looked down at the steering wheel, then into the rearview mirror. Her eyes were Miriam's, her chin Jakob's. And in that moment, she understood. This vehicle wasn't just built to save people. It was built to find its way home, to find the right person, at the right time. She placed both hands on the dashboard. For the first time, Mercy 42 wasn't just a machine. It was family, and it was hers. Dawn was breaking as Mercy 42 rolled out from the shelter. The children sat close together in the back, holding hands. A sun-darkened boy with tangled hair leaned forward and asked, "Has this truck ever saved anyone before?" Naomi looked back. She paused a second, then answered, "Not yet, but today it begins." The escape route was a downhill path cutting through forest, littered with loose rocks and broken branches. Naomi drove slowly, tires growling with each rotation, the scent of burning rubber thick in the confined cabin. Mercy 42 jolted hard as it hit a deep rut, then steadied. At the end of the route stood a rotting wooden bridge spanning a narrow creek. The same bridge Jakob had marked in red on his map with a warning, "Holds weight only if you don't stop." Naomi stopped. She got out and walked to the center of the bridge. The planks creaked under her weight but held. She turned back and opened the rear hatch. One child was already awake, eyes puffy and red. They looked at her and whispered, "Are you scared?" Naomi nodded. "Yeah, but the truck isn't." Mercy 42 began to crawl onto the bridge. The wood groaned like strained breathing. The children fell silent. Kaja kept one hand on the wall, whispering a prayer. The rear wheel slipped slightly, a plank cracked. Naomi tapped the gas just enough to bump the vehicle across. It thudded hard onto the dirt on the other side. She released the steering wheel. Her hands trembled. At the evac point, a convoy of relief vehicles was waiting. When Mercy 42 emerged from the mist, the bystanders instinctively stepped back, not out of fear, but disbelief. A journalist fired off photos. The lead officer rushed forward. "You got them out in that?" Naomi simply pointed to the faded paint, Mercy 42. It was built to save lives, just never got the chance until now. The children were transferred to other vehicles. One little girl hugged Naomi tightly before leaving. I think it remembered the way back, because it's been there before in my grandpa's dreams. Naomi laughed, tears falling with it. She looked back at the truck, its old body chipped paint, but standing tall like an answer to a question someone had forgotten to ask. That day headlines read, WWII relic rescues children in modern war, a family's legacy comes full circle. But Naomi didn't read them. She sat alone in the driver's seat, placing her hands on the wheel, where another pair of hands had rested 80 years before. I brought it where it was meant to go, just like you once tried to. The truck was saved. The story was told, and the courage carried on. 1 month later, Naomi parked Mercy 42 in front of a small elementary school in Vermont. She didn't repaint it. She didn't polish it. She left every scratch, every weld, every faded letter exactly as it was, as a reminder. Beauty isn't how new something is, it's how well it survived. Next to the truck stood a hand-carved wooden sign. Mercy 42, a traveling museum, a vehicle that never arrived on time. Until now. Inside the cabin, Naomi rehung the photo of Jacob and Miriam. Right beside it, she framed the original hand-drawn map. The final note is still visible at the bottom. If someone finds this, keep going. The exhibit was simple, no flags, no banners, just children sitting in a circle around Mercy 42 listening to Naomi tell the story. In a calm voice, eyes damp more than once. One curly-haired girl raised her hand. Do you think the truck remembers? Everything, your grandpa, the kids. Naomi knelt down and touched the faded engraving on the door. I think it remembers everything, and it will tell it to anyone brave enough to listen. That afternoon, as Naomi packed up, an older man approached, worn jacket, bright eyes, a WWII vet pinned on his chest. I drove something like this in Normandy, he said. Never thought I'd see one again not like this. You did what most never dared. Naomi didn't know what to say. She just nodded, then placed her hand on the wheel. I don't think I chose it. I think it chose me, just like you once chose a road no one else would take. That day, a video of Mercy 42 went viral across social media. The military museum that once rejected her sent a letter. We cannot keep this vehicle behind museum walls. It belongs on the road with those who still believe in hope. If you believe, that legacy isn't measured in medals, but in the acts no one ever acknowledged. If you believe that even an old truck can carry courage, memory, and a chance to make the past right again, then share this story, tell it to those who come after us. Because sometimes, the most beautiful things, these are the ones that had to wait for the right person to finish what was started.